Trailer 1 for GTA 6 has currently 167 million views. It debuted over a month ago. And the game coming hopefully in 2025 to PS5 as well as Xbox Series. One thing that I really enjoyed about the trailer, and I've talked about this a few times, was the song that was included with Trailer 1 for GTA 6. Love is a Long Road by Tom Petty. And I happen to be a huge Tom Petty fan. And one thing we're going to do today is we're going to look over the verses of that song, Love is a Long Road, and use it to speculate the direction things are going to go between Lucia and Jason. And if you're not familiar with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, don't worry. I'm going to be talking more about Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and some songs I like from their albums in the second part of this video, as well as a Tom Petty playlist for anyone interested in checking out some music by the late, great Tom Petty. Since the 70s, Tom Petty has put out a ton of songs. And of all the songs out there, it's interesting that Rockstar would pick Love is a Long Road, which is off one of Tom Petty's solo albums, Full Moon Fever. And there's actually a few other hit songs that I personally like off that album. We'll talk about that in a few. But first, let's discuss the verses from that song, Love is a Long Road, and how it could project the direction of the relationship of Jason and Lucia. Now, you only hear verse 1 and chorus 1 in the trailer, but there's actually other verses and choruses from the song. Verse 1, most of you are aware of. There was a girl I knew. She said she cared about me. She tried to make my world the way she thought it should be. So I think, and this is just a theory, that this is from Jason's perspective. If Rockstar picked this song not just because of the opening riff of the guitar, but also because of the lyrics themselves, then there has to be more to the song than just sounding good for trailer 1 of GTA 6. So obviously the girl is Lucia. She said she cared about Jason. She tried to make his world the way she thought it should be. And you go by the chorus, they were desperate then. And that means they were both desperate. She was just getting out of prison. She was on probation. And they probably both weren't doing so well financially. And maybe the only way they knew how to survive is to commit crimes. So we're going to move off to the next verse, which you do not hear in the trailer, but it's still part of the amazing song Love is a Long Road by Tom Petty. Verse 2, this is what it says. There were so many times I would wake up at noon. Yeah, with my head spinning round, I would wait for the moon. I think this also is kind of teased in the trailer with Lucia riding in a sweet sports car in Vice City, and she's up at a party in Vice City. So this is probably somewhere in the game after they've committed some robberies and somehow she's gotten off of probation and they're able to venture into Vice City, and maybe they're making some pretty good money and they're doing quite well, and they're up at night partying at bars and clubs, enjoying the nightlife of Vice City. So Jason is obviously enjoying it as well. And as a result, he's waking up at noon. Head spinning around probably means the use of alcohol and or drugs. And waiting for the moon, I guess they're waiting for the moon to go back out partying once again. Now, the interesting part is the next chorus where Tom Petty sings, and give her one more chance to try to save my soul. Now, that part is interesting because we could speculate what this implies, that Jason is in love with Lucia, and maybe Lucia does love Jason, but maybe it's not exactly a two-way thing. And the fact that it says give her one more chance means that she has let Jason down in the past, and maybe this is her last chance to quote-unquote save Jason's soul. Now we move on to the third and final verse. Yeah, it was hard to give up. Some things are hard to let go. Some things are never enough. Guess I only can hope. Now, we could obviously be reading too much into the song, but if there's more to the song than just being used for the trailer, then this could imply that things are going to eventually fall apart between Lucia and Jason, and he eventually has to quote-unquote give her up and let her go. Even if it's hard to do for him, he has no choice. Maybe she's going down a path that he cannot follow. But then in the last chorus, once again, he talks about maybe one more chance to try to save my soul. This implies that, Lucia might keep letting Jason down over and over again, or disappointing him, but he keeps coming back to her, keep giving her one more chance because of how madly he's in love with Lucia. Whether or not there's more to the lyrics of the song Love is a Long Road by Tom Petty when it comes to the characters of Jason and Lucia remains to be seen. I guess we'll find out when GTA 6 comes out, hopefully in 2025. It is interesting that of all Tom Petty's songs from all of his albums, they would pick this song, Love is a Long Road, off of one of his solo albums, Full Moon Fever. But still, it's a good song. But it does beg the question, why not pick one of the other songs? And there's been songs way more popular that have come out that made it way further up the charts than Love is a Long Road. So I think there is obviously a reason why Love is a Long Road was picked for Trailer 1 for GTA 6. Feel free and let me know your thoughts, views, and opinions regarding the lyrics and chorus of Love is a Long Road by Tom Petty. Is it just a song and we're making too much of it? Or do you think there might be something to the lyrics and chorus from Love is a Long Road in regards to Jason and Lucia? Another reason why Tom Petty was probably picked for GTA 6 Trailer 1 is because Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers are from Florida, which is the real life state of Leonida, which is going to be the fictional state that Vice City happens to be in GTA 6. That's pretty much a given. Now we're going to talk about some of the other songs that have been performed by Tom Petty over the years because, like I said, I am a huge Tom Petty fan, and I did have an ulterior motive when it came to making this video, not only to go over the lyrics of Love is a Long Road, but to also, hopefully, pique some of your interests in Tom Petty. But I've been a Tom Petty fan for my entire life, even before my life began, because my mom, she was a huge Tom Petty fan. She introduced my dad to Tom Petty, and even though my mom passed away when I was just a baby, by extension, my mom made me because of the fact that my dad had also become a Tom Petty fan. Yeah, my dad was the one who ultimately introduced me to Tom Petty, but if it wasn't for my mom, A, I wouldn't be here, and B, I wouldn't be a Tom Petty fan as well. So the two kind of goes hand in hand for me personally. Now, I'm not going to go over all the songs from every single Tom Petty album, but I am going to cite a few that I personally enjoy from most of his albums, not all of them, like the Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers albums, some of his solo albums, and one or two songs from the supergroup Traveling Wilburys, which Tom Petty was a member of. I think the best thing to do is start in chronological order. By the way, I do have a Tom Petty playlist. If you're interested, I put a mix of Tom Petty songs, maybe one or two Traveling Wilbury tunes, a song he did with Stevie Nicks, as well as covers by Johnny Cash. We'll talk more about that in a minute, if you're interested in checking out some songs from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Now, before Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, he was in a band called Mudcrutch. It didn't really go anywhere, but then eventually he formed the band Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Their first album, which was named Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, came out in 1976, and they actually became more popular in the UK than the US early on. And I think one of their big hits back then was Anything That's Rock and Roll. It was a great song, still is. But that became a super hit in the UK, so he has quite a fan base in the United Kingdom. He obviously has a fan base throughout the world, but I think his stardom started in the United Kingdom, even though he's from Florida. Other songs that are really phenomenal on his first album was Breakdown, as well as American Girl. Those are three songs I really enjoy. The next album by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, You're Gonna Get It, came out in 1978. And the one song that I really like off this album is I Need to Know. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' third album, Damn the Torpedoes, came out in 1979. So they were just banging out songs and albums, 76, 78, 79. And there's some really good bangers on Damn the Torpedoes. Refugee, that's a great song. Here Comes My Girl, Even the Losers, Don't Do Me Like That. Those are all great tunes by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Then in 1981, Hard Promises. There's two songs on here that I really like, The Waiting as well as A Woman in Love. The next album is probably one of my two favorite Tom Petty albums of all time personally, Long After Dark. It came out in 1982 on November 2nd, and that date has meaning to me because 19 days later, my mom would pass away, November 21st, 1982. So I honestly don't know if my mom had a chance to listen to Long After Dark by Tom Petty, but there are some amazing songs that I absolutely love on Long After Dark. In fact, 6 out of 10 tracks I'm about to mention: One Story Town, You Got Lucky, Deliver Me, Change of Heart, We Stand a Chance, and Straight Into Darkness. I love all 6 of those songs. Long After Dark is definitely an album I loved playing on my cassette when I was a kid. Then in 1985, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers came out with Southern Accents. There's a few songs on here I really enjoy. Rebels, Don't Come Around Here No More. Now this is a very important song because what was groundbreaking about Don't Come Around Here No More is the music video that debuted on MTV. It was amazing. It was a whole Mad Hatter, Alice in Wonderland scene. Tom Petty had this top hat on because he was portraying the Mad Hatter. And then you had Alice just marching around. And in the end, everyone is eating her like she's a cake. It was a trippy video, but it was one of the first music videos that actually did something like this. And so in time, you would see more music videos get a little bit more creative than just bands dancing or singing in the video. The next song is, of course, the same name as the album, Southern Accents. Now, this is a very emotional song. It's not really a rock song. It's more of a ballad, but it's so powerful, so emotional. And I think this might be one of Tom Petty's favorite songs. And I found out there's another version of Southern Accents. Now, I love Tom Petty's version, but Johnny Cash, the Man in Black himself, actually did a cover of Southern Accents along with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers for one of his albums in 1996. And both versions of Southern Accents is definitely worth listening to. The next album, Let Me Up, there's only one song from this album from 1987 by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Jammin' Me. It was okay. I mean, I'm aware of it. I listened to it before, but not really one of my more favorite albums from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Then we circle back to 1989, Tom Petty's first solo album, Full Moon Fever. Some of you are aware of Love is a Long Road, but there's other songs on this album that are also amazing. Free Falling, You're So Bad, I Won't Back Down, which is an extremely popular song. So many people love using I Won't Back Down. A lot of political candidates, whether Democrat, Republican, etc., love using I Won't Back Down. And this is another song that was eventually covered by Johnny Cash in the year 2000. And once again, Tom Petty was there in the studio with Johnny Cash, playing the guitar, singing backup vocals. And I love both versions of I Won't Back Down, Tom Petty's version as well as him and Johnny Cash. And then another song on this album, Full Moon Fever, Running Down a Dream. So a pretty solid solo album by Tom Petty with Love is the Long Road, as most of you are familiar with. Those other songs definitely worth checking out off the same album. Also in the late 80s, Tom Petty formed a supergroup with several other musicians you may have heard of. Bob Dylan, George Harrison, Jeff Lynne, Roy Orbison. They formed the supergroup Traveling Wilburys. And there's two songs I want to mention from Traveling Wilburys that I personally like. Handle with Care is really good, but one of the most iconic Traveling Wilburys songs is End of the Line. And what's so important about End of the Line is it's the very last song that Roy Orbison ever recorded. In fact, it's basically a tribute to Roy Orbison because there's a rocking chair with an image of Roy Orbison. It was the very last song that Roy Orbison ever sang in studio before he passed away. But it's also a beautiful song, End of the Line by Traveling Wilburys. They were only around for a few years before they ultimately broke up. But I still wanted to mention this because it was a supergroup that Tom Petty was part of. He also gives credit to George Harrison, talking about how it was his band. It was always his band, and it was just a dream he had for a long time. But Tom Petty was part of the Traveling Wilburys. Now let's go back to Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. This is their first album in the 90s. Into the Great Wide Open in 1991. And for me personally, this might be my favorite Tom Petty album of all time. Like number one, Into the Great Wide Open. Number two, Long After Dark. I mean, they're up there top two in my opinion because there's so many songs on this album that I jammed to when I was a kid on my cassette back in the day. 10 out of 12 tracks I'm going to mention right now. Into the Great Wide Open, Learning to Fly, King's Highway, Two Gunslingers, Dark of the Sun, All or Nothing, All the Wrong Reasons, Too Good to Be True, Out in the Cold, You and I Will Meet Again, Built to Last. I love all of those songs. And for the record, not all of them made it on the charts. They weren't hits, but there were a few that were. But I still thought that this was a pretty solid Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers album. In 1993, Tom Petty's greatest hits came out. A lot of his hit songs that I've already mentioned were included in the greatest hits. There was actually different versions of the greatest hits. There was a 2008 reissue that added Stop Dragging My Heart Around, which was a song that Tom Petty did with Stevie Nicks. But the most popular song that was on the greatest hits was Mary Jane's Last Dance. Now, this was a new song at the time, but it became extremely popular back in 1993. Another song that he did was, I think, a cover called Something in the Air. It's a pretty good cover song that he did, but that was replaced in the 2008 reissue with Stop Dragging My Heart Around with him and Stevie Nicks. And I think that the UK version of Greatest Hits included Anything That's Rock and Roll because, once again, that was a hit song back in the United Kingdom back in the 70s. But there's obviously other great songs that are included in the Greatest Hits album. The second solo album by Tom Petty was Wildflowers. This came out in 1994. And I also love this album as well. There's a few songs on here I love. Wildflowers, You Don't Know How It Feels. I believe that was the hit song off that album. So what's interesting about You Don't Know How It Feels, and this is going by my own memory and recollection, is that the radio version was edited to Let's Hit Another Note. But in the album version, he says, let's hit another joint, as in, marijuana, because he likes smoking weed. Another reason why my dad liked Tom Petty. Tom Petty also liked coffee. My late dad, who passed away in 2016, also enjoyed coffee and cannabis. I like coffee, but I'm not really a cannabis person, but, to each their own. So we got Wildflowers, You Don't Know How It Feels, a few other songs I really love off the Wildflowers solo album by Tom Petty. You Wreck Me, A Higher Place, and Crawling Back to You. Then in 1996, there was a movie that came out called She's the One, starring Jennifer Aniston from Friends. She was extremely popular back then, along with Courtney Cox and all the rest of the cast of Friends. And I think that Tom Petty obviously had big influence on the soundtrack for She's the One. He had a song on here that I really, really enjoy. And there's actually two versions of the song. The one that hit the radio stations was called Wall's Number 3. That's the one I personally like. But then another version is Wall's Circus. It's a slower version. I'm not as big of a fan of Wall's Circus as I am Wall's Number 3. So, yeah, I prefer Wall's Number 3 over Wall's Circus. Speaking of radio, in 2000, I ended up in radio. I interned. I ended up doing part-time, weekend overnights. And by 2002, I got to actually promote a Tom Petty song while I was in radio. That was so freaking amazing. That's actually one of the highlights of my radio career personally for me. I mean, I had other highlights too, but one of them for me was being a huge Tom Petty fan and being able to promote a new song by Tom Petty whenever I was on air. And the song, ironically, was called The Last DJ. And I think the DJ that Tom Petty was talking about was a famous DJ from LA that recently passed away. So that's quite interesting as well. But I loved that song, Last DJ by Tom Petty, off the album of the same name. So that was really cool that I got to at least say, hey, coming up next, the new song by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, The Last DJ. That was really cool back when I was in radio. The Last DJ was not the last album that Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers would come out with. There were a few other albums, and I just really wasn't as into them. Maybe it was because when I was in rock radio, I was more into modern rock back in 90s, 2000s rock. So maybe at the time my taste in music had changed just a little bit, but still I love the older Tom Petty tracks that I already mentioned. In 1999, Tom Petty came out with Echo, then 2010 Mojo. And then his final album with the Heartbreakers was Hypnotic Eye in 2014. And the only other song that I'm familiar with was off Highway Companion, which was his final solo album in 2006 called Saving Grace. Despite being in radio, I only got to see Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers perform once live, and that was during their Lost Cities tour. They were at UNO in New Orleans, August 26, 2003. I was working in Baton Rouge at the time, and my dad came down to visit with his girlfriend, and I bought us tickets for him, his girlfriend, and me, and we drove down from Baton Rouge to New Orleans just to watch Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers perform. He was kind of going to like a Western kick back then, so he didn't play as many of his old hits as I would have liked. But I still enjoyed being able to experience Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers live during the Lost Cities tour. In hindsight, I really wish I would have gotten to go to more Tom Petty concerts, but unfortunately that would be the first and last Tom Petty concert I'd ever be able to attend, because sadly he would die a decade later in 2017. But obviously, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers have had a great influence on my life personally. As I've mentioned, I'm a huge fan. I always will be. Hashtag Petty forever. And if you weren't familiar with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers before Trailer 1 for GTA 6, I hope that you will at least consider checking out some more of Tom Petty's tracks, which I will include in an unlisted playlist just for you. Obviously, I didn't include every single song I mentioned. I just decided to have a nice list of Tom Petty tracks, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, some of his solo stuff, songs from Traveling Wilburys, Johnny Cash, Stevie Nicks. And if I was somehow able to convert at least one of you into becoming a Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers fan, well, mission accomplished. And if you're also a fellow Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers fan, I would love to see your list of favorite songs and albums from Tom Petty, whether it's with the Heartbreakers, solo, Traveling Wilburys, or Johnny Cash, etc. As always, welcome below in the comments section.